Chapter 36. Founding St. Joseph's. After leaving Toledo, my spirits lifted, and my journey back to Avila was pleasant. I was determined to accept God's will in whatever forms it manifested. The same night I reached the city, the documents authorizing the new foundation arrived from Rome. What a coincidence! I was amazed by the timing. So was everyone else involved in this project, for they knew how the Lord had made me return very quickly, and now it was clear why. I was needed here. The bishop was waiting for me, along with the saintly Pedro de Alcantara and a gentleman with whom the holy friar was staying, who was also a great friend to God. This gentleman regularly gave protection and support to God's servants. The two men convinced the bishop to sanction the new monastery. This was not easy, since the poverty issue was such an unpopular one. But anyone who was determined to serve God was dear to this bishop's heart, and we soon won his support. It was really Father Pedro who made everything happen. The elderly holy friar believed so strongly in this foundation that he went around gently urging all the right people to help us. If it hadn't been for the extraordinary coincidence of my arriving on that very night, I don't think the monastery ever would have been founded. As it turned out, Father Pedro was not going to be with us for much longer. He was very sick at that time, and God brought him to himself 8 days later. It seems that His Majesty purposely preserved Father Pedro until the business was taken care of. He had already been dying for almost 2 years. We did everything under a veil of secrecy. Otherwise, I don't think we could have pulled it off. So many people were against our project, which became increasingly evident later. Around this time, the Lord ordained that my brother-in-law, Juan, who was in Avila to finish negotiations for the house they had purchased for our new monastery, became ill. Since my sister Juana was not there, it fell on me to take care of him. With this excuse, I was able to leave the Incarnation and attend to the business of the foundation without anyone suspecting anything. Well, that's not exactly right. Some people were accusing me of hatching a plot, but my superiors did not listen to them. The amazing thing is that my brother-in-law's illness only lasted as long as it took to complete our business with the new foundation. As soon as I needed to be free of my duties as caregiver, Juan got better and moved back to Alba. This also freed up the house he had procured for us. Juan himself was amazed by how the Lord brought all this about. I had a lot of trouble at different times from different people who opposed the foundation of this new monastery. I also had trouble with my sick brother-in-law. Then there were the workmen. There was so much to do to convert the house into a convent, and it all needed to be done quickly. Plus, my companion, Doña Guiomar, was away at Toro. That was intentional, though. It seemed to us that we would have more luck concealing our activities if she was not there. For many reasons, I saw that everything needed to be taken care of in a hurry. One reason was that with every passing hour I was away from the Incarnation, I was afraid they were going to demand that I return. There were so many challenges happening at the same time that I couldn't help but wonder if this was the cross to which the Lord had referred. But it all seemed like a light burden compared to the heavy one He had led me to expect. It was August 24th, St. Bartholomew's Day. Everything was ready. The Blessed Sacrament was in place. The first group of sisters received the habit: Antonia del Espíritu Santo, María de la Cruz, Ursula de los Santos, and María de San José. Thus, with all due authority and power, this monastery of our most glorious Father, St. Joseph, was founded in 1562. I was present for the receiving of the sacred robes, along with 2 other sisters from the Incarnation. Remember, my brother-in-law had bought the house we converted into the monastery so that we could keep our project a secret while we were fixing it up. So I had permission to be there. Plus, I had consulted so many learned men along the way that I was confident I had not compromised my vow of obedience one iota. The men who supported me saw many reasons why this foundation would be beneficial to the whole Carmelite order. They told me to proceed with the plan, although I did everything in secret so that my superiors would not find out. If they had discovered a single real imperfection in anything I was doing, I would have willingly given up founding of 1,000 monasteries, let alone one. This is beyond question. Even though I was dying to radically withdraw from everything and live simply, focusing exclusively on prayer, what I wanted most was to be of service to God. If I had found out that I could have served Him better by not living in strict enclosure, I would have abandoned the entire project with complete peace and calm as I had done before. Well, it was like heaven for me to see the most holy sacrament reserved in our new monastery and 4 poor orphans who happened to be 4 great servants of God come together to support each other in following the way of perfection. This is what I had always envisioned, that the people who would join this community would live by their example of prayer and integrity. They would be the foundation on which we could build to attain our goal. All I cared about was that we would work together to achieve what I knew in my heart would be of service to the Lord and would honor the Blessed Mother. It also made me happy to have followed the directions of my beloved and dedicated a new church to our glorious Father, St. Joseph. Not that I ever thought I really had anything to do with it. Everything was the work of God. What small part I played, I performed so imperfectly that I found far more cause to blame myself than to congratulate myself. Still, it gave me a great delight to see that He would use someone as flawed as I am to be an instrument of His wondrous work. My joy was so intense that it transported me beyond myself and put me into a state of profound prayer. But then, around 3 hours later, the spirit of evil paid me a little visit and instigated a spiritual battle within me. "Maybe what you have done is wrong," he said. "Maybe you actually did violate your vow of obedience to make a foundation without your provincial's consent." He hit a nerve here. I was concerned that the provincial might be angry that I hadn't told him what I was doing ahead of time and that I had arranged things so that the bishop would be in charge of us. On the other hand, he was the one who had refused to sanction it. But I had never changed my plans. Why should he care that we went ahead without him? "Maybe the sisters who live in this house will be unhappy with such rigorous austerity," the spirit of evil went on. "What if they don't get enough to eat? Isn't this venture simply foolish? What business is it of yours anyway? You already have a convent to live in, and a perfectly good one." All the commands the Lord had given me, all the good advice I had solicited and received, all the unceasing prayers of the past 2 years vanished from my memory, as if they had never happened. I could only remember my own decisions. My faith and all my other virtues were paralyzed. I had no strength to reactivate my useless virtues or defend myself against these unrelenting blows. How could you even think about shutting yourself up in a strictly enclosed monastery when you have so many health problems? The spirit of evil demanded. How could you leave such a pleasant and spacious monastery, where you have been so content to live, where you will have to endure such penance? And what about all your friends at the Incarnation? What if you don't like your new companions? And you have taken on so many obligations. It's a setup for despair. Maybe the spirit of evil was trying to steal my inner peace and quiet so that I wouldn't be able to concentrate on prayer and would then lose my soul. He mixed up all these thoughts together in my mind so that I was powerless to think of anything else. I cannot possibly exaggerate the state of confusion. It plunged my soul into deep darkness. Finding myself in this wretched condition, I made my way to the Blessed Sacrament. I was incapable of praying, so I just sat there in my pain. I felt like a person must feel in the death agony. And there was no one I could speak to about it because I had not yet been assigned a spiritual director. Oh God, help me. What a hard life this is. There is not a single joy that lasts, and nothing that does not change. Only a short time ago it seemed to me I would not trade my happiness with anyone on earth. Now the very reason for this happiness so thoroughly tormented me that I didn't know what to do with myself. Oh, if only we would consciously observe the events of our lives, we would see what little cause they really give us for either happiness or unhappiness. I truly think this was one of the most difficult episodes of my life. It was as if my soul were having a premonition of everything I was going to have to endure. Still, none of the trials to come would prove to be as severe as this night of suffering would have been if it had continued unabated. But the Lord did not let his poor servant suffer for very long. He never does. He always gives me comfort in my tribulations. In this case, he cast a little light to help me see that the spirit of evil was causing all the trouble. I realized that the spirit of evil was using lies to try and scare me away. Once I saw what was going on, I was able to remember my powerful resolution to serve God and my desire to suffer for him. I realized that if I were to act on these lofty intentions, I couldn't go around seeking ways to rest. If trials came my way, I would earn merit by withstanding them. If I experienced unhappiness and offered it up in service to God, it would purify my soul. I had nothing to fear. The greater the opposition, the greater the gain. Why didn't I have the courage to serve the one who had given me so much? With the help of these reflections, I got myself back under control. I vowed before the Blessed Sacrament to do everything in my power to obtain permission to come live in the monastery I had founded. I promised I would commit myself to a strictly cloistered existence as soon as I could do so in good conscience. The moment I made this vow, the spirit of evil fled. I instantly felt calm and happy, and have remained that way ever since. All the seclusion and austerities that we practice here have turned out to be extremely easy for me. My joy is so complete that I wonder sometimes what else could possibly bring me this much delight. I am starting to think that this life of radical simplicity is also contributing to the general increase in my health. Maybe the Lord wants to give me this consolation so that I can observe the austerities required of those who live here, since it is necessary and correct for me to do whatever everyone else has to do. Sometimes these things are hard for me, but for the most part, I feel better than I've ever felt in my life. All the people who know about my chronic health problems are amazed by my ability to adhere to these standards. Blessed be the one who gives us all things, and by whose power all things can be done. This conflict with the spirit of evil left me utterly exhausted, but I chuckled to myself to see that it had all been an illusion. This was the first time in my 28 years of being a nun that I had regretted my monastic vocation even for a moment. I think the Lord allowed this conflict to help me see what a favor he had granted me and what torment he had saved me from. Also, now I wouldn't be surprised if someone who was unhappy as a nun were to come to me. Instead, I would have compassion for her and know how to console her. After the turmoil had passed and we had eaten dinner, I wanted to get some rest. I had hardly slept all night, and I had been working late or else worrying for many other nights. Plus, my days were so filled with work that I was almost always tired. But then, my superior sent for me to return to the incarnation immediately. Word of what we had done had spread through the city and created a public outcry. This negative reaction seemed to bear considerable weight with the prioress of the incarnation. As soon as I received her orders, I left my nuns, who were very sad to see me go, and returned to the incarnation. I could tell that I was going to be confronted with many obstacles, but I wasn't too worried because at least our new monastery was now established. I prayed to the Lord to protect me. I prayed to my father, St. Joseph, to bring me home to his house very soon. And I offered up to God whatever suffering I might yet have to endure. I was pretty sure they would throw me in a prison cell the moment I arrived at the Incarnation. I was quite happy about the upcoming opportunity to suffer for my beloved and to serve him. Actually, I thought it might be pleasant to be incarcerated for a while. I wouldn't have to talk to anyone, and I could get a little solitude for some badly needed rest. I was worn out from having to deal with people so much. When I gave an account of our activities to the prioress, she was somewhat placated. They resolved to send everything to the provincial and let him decide. When he came, I went willingly to receive whatever judgment he had for me. I was happy to know that I would be suffering something for the sake of my beloved. I couldn't find it in my heart to believe that I had committed any offense either against His Majesty or against the Carmelite order. On the contrary, I was doing everything in my power to contribute to the positive growth of that order. My desire for our order to fulfill its mission perfectly was so intense that I would have eagerly died for it. I thought about Christ's trial and saw that my own persecution amounted to nothing at all. I accused myself of being at fault and acted as if I were very much to blame. To anyone who didn't know the reasons, this appeared to be perfectly true. The provincial reprimanded me severely, although not as severely as the transgression deserved, at least according to what so many people had told him. I had no desire to defend myself. I had been determined to do what I did. I simply asked for his forgiveness and invited his punishment. "Please don't be angry with me," I added. It was clear to me that some of the things they blamed me for were not my fault. For instance, they said I founded the monastery so that I would become famous and people would revere me, which was far from the case. But in other matters, they were speaking the plain truth, as when they said I was no better than anybody else and, in fact, much worse. "If you couldn't even observe the monastic rule of your own house," they asked me, "what makes you think you'll be able to keep an even stricter one?" They accused me of creating a scandal and promoting innovation. None of this bothered me that much, but I acted as if it did. I didn't want to give them the impression that I was not taking what they were telling me to heart. Finally, the provincial ordered me to go explain myself to the nuns, which I did. I felt a sense of deep inner peace, and I knew the Lord was with me. I expressed myself to my sisters in such a way that no one there could find anything for which to condemn me. Afterward, when I was alone with the provincial, I was able to speak more freely with him. He was quite satisfied, and he promised to sanction the new foundation. "Let's let the commotion in the city die down a little first," he said. "Then if all goes well, I promise to help you." But the opposition was fierce. After 3 days of deliberation, some of the city councilmen and the mayor unanimously declared that they could not by any means grant their consent to our new foundation. To do so, they said, would bring significant harm to the greater community. They ordered the immediate removal of the Blessed Sacrament from the house and commanded that all work related to the foundation come to an absolute halt. Then they convened a meeting between 2 learned representatives from each religious order so that everyone could voice their opinion on the matter. Some of the representatives condemned the new foundation. Others remained silent. The final consensus was that the monastery should be dismantled right away. They were furious. Only one man, the Dominican Domingo Bañez, spoke up to say that the foundation should not be suppressed, but rather should be more carefully considered. The only thing he objected to was the rule of poverty. He said there was plenty of time to reconsider, and that it was really the bishop's business anyway. His words had a calming effect, and prevented the group from storming in to shut us down that day. In the end, The foundation had to continue because the Lord was pleased with it. All those men together couldn't do a thing against God's will. This did not stop them from persecuting me, however. They stated their case with righteous zeal. Without offending God, they managed to make everyone who was associated with the project suffer for it. The town was in such an uproar that it was all people could talk about. Everyone was condemning me. They were petitioning my monastery and appealing to my provincial. What they were saying about me caused me no more pain than if they hadn't said anything at all. In fact, I think that the negative things people said about me made me very happy. The only thing that concerned me was whether or not they would succeed in having us shut down. Also, even though I didn't care about my own honor, it disturbed me to realize that the reputation of people who were helping me were being damaged. If I had had a little faith, I don't think I would have felt so conflicted. But a small lack in one of the virtues seems to put them all to sleep. During the 2 days they were holding those meetings in town, I was deeply troubled. At the height of my distress, the Lord spoke to me. "Don't you know that I am omnipotent?" he said. "What are you afraid of?" He assured me that the new monastery would not be dissolved. This was very comforting to me. The assembly sent an official denunciation to the royal council. When the reply came, it simply asked for an account of exactly how the new monastery had been founded. This led to a lawsuit. The city of Avila sent its delegates to the royal council. Then we had to find someone to go and represent us. But I had no money for legal assistance. I didn't know what to do. The Lord provided, however, and my provincial never ordered me to give up my involvement with the foundation. This man is so sympathetic to any virtuous cause that even though he didn't actively help us, he didn't stand in our way. But he waited to see what the outcome of the lawsuit would be before he gave his permission to move to St. Joseph's. So my sisters, those great servants of God, were left on their own in the beginning. They accomplished more through their prayers than I did with all my negotiations. Still, the legal affair demanded a great deal of effort on my part. Sometimes it seemed that nothing was working, especially when the prioress of the Incarnation came to me the day before the provincial was scheduled to arrive and ordered me to have nothing more to do with the new monastery. This meant abandoning everything I had worked so hard to achieve. I went to God and said to him, "Lord, this house is not mine. It was founded for you. Now that there's no one to manage its business, you're going to have to take over." I felt so calm and at ease after this that it was as if the whole world were managing everything for me. From that moment on, I knew I was in good hands. Father Gonzalo de Aranda, a great servant of God, went to the royal council to advocate for us. This priest was dedicated to the way of perfection, and he had always been very good to me. And that saintly gentleman, who had been through so much with me, Francisco de Salcedo, did everything he could to assist us. He suffered innumerable trials on our behalf, but he always treated me as his own daughter and is still like a father to me. Everyone who helped us found themselves blessed by a sense of deep connectedness to the cause. Each one considered the matter integral to his own life and treated it as if his personal honor depended on it. What mattered most to them was that this foundation was about serving God. It seemed clear that His Majesty was assisting Father Gaspar Daza, the priest who had been such a tremendous help to me. The bishop sent Father Daza as his representative to a major meeting about our foundation. He stood alone against all the rest, and ultimately won them over by recommending certain procedures that would buy us some time. But none of this was enough to throw the men off course. They seemed intent on suppressing the foundation, as if its termination were a matter of life and death. This priest was the same one who had officiated at the ceremony where the first sisters of St. Joseph's received their robes. He reserved the Blessed Sacrament there and was vehemently persecuted for it. The attack on us lasted 6 months. It would take far too long to recount in detail the horrendous trials we endured during this time. It was amazing to me that the spirit of evil would bother to stir up so much trouble against a few poor little women. And I couldn't believe that the people of Avila would consider a dozen cloistered sisters and their prioress such a threat to the community at large. If the foundation turned out to be a mistake, it might cause harm to the sisters who lived there. But how could it hurt the city? It just didn't make sense. Not to me, anyway. But it apparently made good enough sense to our adversaries that they fought with all their might to oppose us and felt thoroughly justified in doing so. They finally offered a compromise position. We could found the new monastery, but only if we had an income. At this point, I was so weary of all the struggles that I considered giving in. I felt worse about the trials of the people who were helping me than about my own. Maybe it wasn't such a bad idea to allow for an income until our opponents settled down. We could always relinquish it later. Maybe this is what the Lord wanted, since it didn't seem as if it would work out any other way. Being what I am, these are the thoughts I entertained. The night before the matter was supposed to be resolved, I was in prayer. I was already in the process of acquiescing to the demands of the city, and we had begun to discuss the details. Then the Lord spoke to me. "You must not give in to them," he said. "If you accept an income in the beginning, they will not let you renounce it later." That same night, the holy friar Pedro de Alcántara, who was already dead, appeared before me. Before he died, Father Pedro had written me a letter telling me that he rejoiced in the intense opposition and persecution we were suffering to bring this new foundation into being. He knew what we were going through and considered it a sign that the Lord would be served by it, since the spirit of evil was going to so much trouble to thwart it. In the letter, he also urged me 3 or 4 times not to accept an income under any circumstances. "If you follow my advice," he wrote, "everything will turn out the way you desire." I had seen Father Pedro 2 or 3 times since his death and had experienced his great glory, so I was not afraid when he appeared to me that night. Rather, it made me very happy to see him. He always manifested in his glorified body, filled with glory, and it filled me with glory to behold him. I recalled what he had told me the first time he appeared to me. "My joy is utterly sublime," he said. "The penance I performed on earth has yielded an abundant reward." I think I have already told you about these glorious appearances, so I will not say any more about them here. But this time, his countenance was severe. He repeated that I should by no means accept any revenue. "Why do you refuse to take my advice?" he asked. Then he vanished, leaving me startled. At my first opportunity the next day, I confided in my old friend Don Francisco. Since he was now the man who was most involved in the project, I turned to him with everything. I told him about my vision and instructed him that we absolutely must not accept an endowment. "Let's let them go ahead with the lawsuit," I said. But Don Francisco was already more convinced of the importance of poverty than I was. This news made him very happy. Later, he told me he had only agreed to that compromise with the most severe reluctance. Then, just as the negotiations were about to result in a settlement, an overly zealous servant of God stepped forward to say that the entire matter should be placed in the hands of some learned men. This worried me. Some of the people who were helping me actually capitulated to that proposal. This new snarl the spirit of evil tied in our project proved to be the most difficult of all tangles to unravel. The Lord helped me with everything. It would be impossible for me to describe all that happened in a summary like this. Although the entire 2 years between the founding of the monastery and the resolution of the litigation was a difficult time, the first and last phases were the most labor-intensive. Well, once the city of Avila was somewhat mollified, Father Ibanez, the Dominican who had been helping us from afar, came to our rescue in an important way. The Lord brought him to us just when we needed him most. This priest later told us that he had not intended to come to Avila, but had ended up there by accident. When he heard of our plight, he stayed long enough to convince the provincial to let me come to the new monastery, along with a few other sisters from the Incarnation, to recite the divine office and teach it to the sisters here. It was almost impossible to believe that he could pull this off in such a short time, but he did. The provincial granted us his permission. The day we first went to St. Joseph's to recite the divine office was a day of profound consolation for me. Before I entered the new monastery, I sat outside in the church to pray. As I slipped into a nearly total state of rapture, I saw Christ. He seemed to be receiving me with great love. He placed a crown on my head and thanked me for everything I had done for his mother. On another occasion, we were all praying in the choir after Compline, and Our Lady appeared to me in all her glory. She was clothed in a white mantle, and it seemed as though she were sheltering all of us beneath it. I saw this as a sign of the high degree of glory the Lord would give the sisters who lived in this house. Once we had initiated the liturgical practices, people began to grow deeply devoted to the new monastery. We accepted more nuns, and the Lord began to inspire our most vigorous persecutors to become our most enthusiastic supporters. They approved the very thing of which they had disapproved, and they even gave us alms. Eventually, they dropped the whole lawsuit. They admitted that the house must be the work of God, since His Majesty had brought it into being against all odds. There is no one left who thinks the new foundation was a bad idea, and they provide us with charity to keep us going. We don't have to beg or even ask for anything from anybody. The Lord moves them to send us money. We get along very well and do not lack any necessities. I trust in the Lord that we never will. There are so few of us, and as long as His Majesty continues to give us the grace to serve Him, as He has done so far, I am sure we will never need to be so anxious that we become a burden or a bother to anyone. The Lord will provide for us. It is a supreme joy to find myself living with such detached souls. All they talk about is how they can serve God better. They take comfort in solitude, and the only people they want to see are those who make the fire of their love for their beloved burn brighter. Otherwise, the thought of being with other people, even their own relatives, is a burden to them. They do not entertain idle visitors. And so, people do not come to this house unless they come to talk about love. The language of love is the only vocabulary the sisters know. They don't understand anyone who does not speak the same language, nor could anyone who doesn't know that language understand a word these lovers say. It seems to me now that all the trials we suffered were well worth it. We live with severe austerity, it's true. We follow the original Carmelite rule. We are strict vegetarians except by necessity. We observe an 8-month fast and other rigors. We engage in some other aesthetic practices that we feel help us live the rule more perfectly. But all of these sacrifices feel small to the sisters. All I can do now is hope in the Lord that what has begun to blossom will continue to flower as His Majesty has promised it will. The Lord has also showered blessings on the other house founded by the Holy Sister Maria de Jesus. Sister Maria, too, was confronted with horrendous opposition and suffered severe trials. Her monastery has been established in Alcalá, and they also conform to the primitive rule of our order. May it please our Lord that everything we do for His glory and praise, and the glory and praise of His Blessed Mother, the glorious Virgin Mary, whose robes we wear. Amen. I suspect that the long history I have given of the foundation of our monastery may be a little tedious to read. But believe me, In light of the many trials we suffered and the wonders we enjoyed, it's very short. There are many witnesses who can attest to the marvels the Lord worked for us, so I beg you, even if you tear up all the other parts of this account, please preserve anything that pertains to this monastery. When I am dead, please give this document to the sisters who live here. I have a feeling it will serve as an important encouragement to those who come after us. When they see how His Majesty orchestrated so many things to establish this place, using such a flawed creature as myself as an instrument, it will inspire them to be of even greater service to God. May they never let what has been created here fall into decay, but rather help it to flourish forever. The Lord has very specifically blessed this foundation. It seems to me that we would be committing a punishable offense if we were ever to slacken the way of perfection that has been established here. Since we bear this tradition with such ease and everything runs so smoothly, He obviously favors it. The single requirement for maintaining this equanimity is to rejoice in Christ our beloved. This must be our sole aim, to be alone with Him. And we must strive to have no more than 13 members living here. I have been told that this is an appropriate number and have had this confirmed through experience. If we are to preserve our spiritual life and survive on charity without begging, we cannot sustain a large number. Let us always trust the One who, with the many prayers and willing surrender of many souls, made everything work out for the best. We have experienced such happiness and delight during our years here. Our burdens have been light. Our health has been better than ever. These things testify to the correctness of our small numbers. Anyone who thinks life here is harsh should blame her own lack of spirituality and not our practices. If women who are sickly or have delicate constitutions observe the rule so gracefully, why shouldn't these others be able to endure it? Those who are not ready for this way of life should go to some other monastery where they can find salvation in accordance with their own spiritual natures.